Hello! My name is Newbie and I'm starting a YouTube channel. I think it's primarily... Hello? Sure, yeah. Okay. Hi. If you don't know me, which you probably don't because this is my first video, my name is Noemi and I'm an English major. I love literature. I'm also an aspiring writer, so I hope to just find a community that's similar to myself that I can share my favorite books with, what I'm working on, and it can be a mutual friendship. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my 5 favorite books written by female authors. I wanted to do my 5 favorite books, but I also thought it'd be cool to showcase specifically female authors. Okay, let's get started. The first book I'm going to share is Alice Walker's Meridian. You've probably heard of Alice Walker. She wrote The Color Purple, which was super famous. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize actually. But Meridian is a book that I read when I was still in community college, and it revolves around a social activist in the 1960s South. Her name is Meridian. And while the plot is interesting, I think what really makes this book special is the character of Meridian. She's kind of an enigma. And I just remember really being intrigued by the decisions she makes and the memories she has. It's really a pathway into the female psyche, I think, and really interesting, specifically a woman growing up in the South, interested in fighting for social justice, but being barred by a lot of the barriers that society places in front of those women. So if you liked The Color Purple, I highly recommend. The prose is really great. So yeah, love that one. My next book is one that I got recommended recently. I'm part of a writing group, and one of the members told me that I should read this because it follows several different characters. It has sort of a fragmented storyline, and that's really what I've been interested in recently because that's kind of the project that I'm working on now as far as my own writing. So, it's called Tropic of Orange by Karen Yamashita, and it's set in LA, which I think is really cool. I live in LA, so it was interesting to see how the author uses LA landmarks like freeways to make this book seem like it is part of the city. That didn't make sense. I don't know, I'm just fascinated by LA literature. Actually, my first year at UCLA, I took a literary Los Angeles class, and it was fantastic, and I've been enamored with everything LA ever since. I don't know, LA just kind of has a grittiness that I think is really fun to read and write about. But anyway, so the story follows, I want to say 5, but I'm going to say the wrong thing, so never mind. It follows several different characters, homeless people, and people that the city has kind of brought down, and they all sort of intersect in one big freeway accident. It's a fantastic book. It brings together magical realism with, yeah, that sort of gritty urban literature that I think is really interesting. I believe it was written in 97, but it feels extremely modern. When I was reading it, I didn't even notice the characters were using like pagers and old-fashioned phones because it feels like, this is such a cheesy saying, but it has the pulse of the city. What is that saying? It has its finger on the pulse of the city. Okay, that was annoying. I'm going to read you. For my work, I wrote an article about 3 of the books that I'm talking about today. And so I'm going to read you just a sentence or 2 from this because I'm much more articulate in writing than I am when I'm speaking. The prose and content feel both very modern and in touch with the current ethos of the country. It's set in Los Angeles and Mexico. Yamashita is able to weave realistic fiction with magical realism. The dialogue is sharp, it's witty, it's ironic, and her characters are refreshingly real and vibrant. She juggles a cast of 7 characters, 7, who each contribute a portion of their narrative over the course of 7 days. And each chapter is during one day of the week through the point of view of one character. So the way that she juggles the storyline is super cool. It's also a very diverse cast, which I really appreciate, especially since it's coming from 1997. It feels like it's a little bit ahead of its time, to be honest. I mean, we're having this cultural revolution right now. I mean, in the wake of BLM, I just think that it's really cool that she included so many different types of characters. One of the main characters is a Chicano news reporter. The other is a Japanese-American television executive. It also follows the man's housekeeper, Rafaela, who works to maintain his second home in Mexico, and her estranged husband, Bobby, who is an immigrant from China who poses as Vietnamese, which is confusing, but it's really interesting. So I highly recommend. I think it's a fantastic book. Moving forward, I've got here Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. I hope I'm saying her name right. This is one of my favorite books and probably the most inspiring for my own writing recently. I'm trying to emulate the way that she's set up the storyline. They're kind of similar to the Yamashita book, but each chapter is a different character, but each of the characters are connected, and so it kind of feels like a collection of short stories, but each story builds off of the last, and it's all about one giant extended family. And so it's very cohesive, even though each chapter is a different person, a different story, if that makes sense. This one is published in 2015, so it's actually pretty recent, and it's Gyasi's debut novel, which I think is so impressive. It's a historical fiction in the form of a collection of like short stories, like I said, and it chronicles the lives of the descendants of 2 half-sisters, Effia and Essie, who were born into the Asante and Fonte tribes. So where we start out in this book is 17th century Ghana, and it leads us all the way into the modern day, into the present moment, basically 2015, through the descendants of these 2 half-sisters. So one of the half-sisters' descendants stay in Ghana all the way through the story, basically. And then the other half-sister is taken on a slave ship to America, and we see those descendants make their way through American history and culture, which I think is so fascinating. It really opened my eyes just to how impactful your family history can be in your current day existence, which I think is something a lot of people ignore. They think that all that matters is your generation, your parents' generation. But we kind of forget about the fact that slavery was like 5 minutes ago in the history of our country, and it had such a huge impact on the people who were, subjugated. So anyway, this is such an amazing book. I read it for an African American lit class, or an Africa in America lit class in the spring at UCLA. And I love it. I highly encourage you to read it. It made me cry. The prose is simple but beautiful, and it also weaves magical realism into the plot, but still in a very realistic way. We see Essie's descendants live through slavery in the South, segregation in Harlem, and discrimination in various periods and places until the present day. Gyasi embraces some supernatural aspects of African tradition and utilizes them to illuminate the reality of African culture and spiritualism. So, honestly, really great. Okay, I'm gonna move on. The next book that I absolutely adore that I read this summer for fun is Isabel Allende's The House of Spirits. As you can see, this is a pretty chunky book. It is around 400 pages. It goes really fast. It's amazing. Also, the cover is so aesthetically pleasing. I love it. So this one is another family chronicle rooted in historical fiction, and it was published in 1982, I believe in Chile or Brazil. Okay, wait, I don't want to get this wrong. But I know that it was originally written in Spanish and it was translated. It follows 4 generations of the aristocratic Trueba family in Chile in the 20th century. And half of the family is very conservative, half of the family are liberal revolutionaries, which is interesting, just seeing that tension within a single family, kind of representing the tension that's going on in the country at the time. It's a really useful literary device that she uses. And we come to love the characters too. I mean, it's not just the plot. The country is basically riddled with political turmoil and class warfare. And though she weaves those elements into the plot very well, the characters just really shine. I think the patriarch of the family, Esteban, is the grandfather. And he helps bring about the conservative counter-revolution. And the younger members of the family are helping to bring about the original liberal revolution. And it's actually pretty... Sorry, there's squeaking above me. It's pretty horrifying, the details that we get about what happened. There's a lot of bloodshed, but it's also just hauntingly beautiful. And I'm not gonna give away a spoiler, but we find out who the narrator was at the very end of the story. So we basically have this semi-omniscient narrator who's giving us all this information. Seems like an insider in the family, but we don't know who it is. And then at the very end, it's revealed and we understand why her story was so important. I feel like I'm sort of deteriorating into non-articulateness. So yeah, there's a love story. There's actually several love stories, but one of the main love stories is between the daughter of the aristocratic family, or I guess the daughter. Both. There's a lot of love stories. It's beautiful. And another reason that I chose this book to read is because, like I said, I'm really interested in the whole familial plotline where we get different characters from multiple generations of a family and we see how they're sort of reflecting the society around them. And you definitely get that with this book, and so that's something that I definitely would love to emulate in my own writing. Last sentence of this so that you guys know that I'm not an idiot. For anyone unfamiliar with Allende, I can't recommend this sprawling, evocative, and sometimes highly humorous masterpiece enough. There you go, that's my articulate self. Last book, last but not least, is Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. First of all, the cover is so cool. Joan Didion is my hero. I love her writing so much. It's very different than the prose from the other books that I've just mentioned, but it's so captivating. If you haven't read Didion, I highly recommend start with this book. I read it all in one night. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't sleep until I had finished it. It's pretty short. You can really get it done in one day. It's about 200 pages and it goes really fast. If you haven't read Didion, I would start with this, but her nonfiction is also incredible. She has a book of nonfiction. I mean, she has several books. There's The White Album, Slouching Towards Bethlehem. Fantastic. If you're a wannabe writer, especially a female writer, I highly encourage you read that. It has some of her thoughts on writing, a little bit more of a personal diary type of nonfiction book. She has a bunch of short stories there. It's really great. I want to read a sentence of this so you can get a feeling for what her prose sounds like. It's very pared down and simple, observational, and yet we get so much into the character. This is also another LA book. It occurs in the 1960s. It's very, again, it really has its finger on the pulse of Hollywood culture, and it's interesting to see how it is in the 1960s. Not that different from today. We also see the main character in Las Vegas and in the Mojave Desert. The main character is sort of spiraling into mental disarray. I don't really want to like tell you guys the plots of these stories because you can always look it up, but I just want to give you a feeling for like the essence of the book, what's important about it. And for me, her prose is just beautiful and scary and really gets inside of you and makes a home in there. So yeah, I'm gonna read one little snippet. In the dream from which she woke when the telephone rang again that night, she had the baby, and she and the baby and Kate were living on West 12th Street with Ivan Costello. In the dream, she did not yet know Carter, but somehow had Carter's daughter and Carter's blessing. In the dream, it was all right. She supposed that she had dreamed of Ivan Costello because the telephone was ringing, and he used to call her in the middle of the night. "How much do you want it?" he used to say. "Tell me what you'd do to get it from me." The telephone was still ringing, and she pulled the cord loose from the jack. She could not remember what she would have done to get it from any of them. So that's a whole chapter. It takes up about half a page. It's chapter 21. So I love that her chapters are also these really, really short vignettes. I mean, this one too, chapter 20. It's somehow really pleasing to read these really short snippets that are so enlightening and give you so much through so little, if you know what I mean. So, those were my 5 books by female authors that I wanted to recommend to you guys. Hopefully these recommendations will provide some writing inspiration, especially if you're working in the genre of historical fiction or trying to weave in elements of magical realism. I think these books are great examples of that. If you're trying to pare down your prose, I mean, I think Meridian and Play It As It Lays are very good examples of simple but very powerful writing. So yeah, I appreciate you guys being here and watching me. I hope to continue